so let's talk about herbs. My name is Blair. I am in Zone 8B in Central Texas, and I live in the Austin area in an urban setting. And I have a pretty decent, I think we have an 8,000-ish square foot lot. And I have about 4-ish by 8-ish foot garden beds. I count some of my vertical garden beds for that. Maybe I have 9. I can't remember. I have a lot of beds of gardening space. And I've kind of taken over one corner of my yard, and I've got a few kind of scattered anywhere else I could get a garden bed fit into my yard. I've thought of a few more places, but I haven't quite done them yet. Anyway, I love gardening, and I got started with just one bed, one little 4 by 8 foot bed with it was a concrete. It has those the concrete cinder blocks, and it has holes all the way around the outside edge because the concrete cinder blocks are hollow, and it has 2 big holes for every concrete cinder block you put in. And the cool thing about that was I started out planting a lot of herbs around the outside edge of that and learned a lot about gardening because I had 30 or so holes around the outside edge of this garden that I could plant in and kind of have 30 individual crops, and then also have some, I think I planted watermelon and cowpeas, I think was the first thing I planted that first year back in 2015. Oh my goodness, I've been saying I've been gardening for 6 seasons. I think it might be 8, actually. I could learn how to do math. Anyway, I think I've been gardening for 8 years, but really more so kind of the first year was kind of a little bit of a thing, and then it's gotten bigger over time. And I started with one little bed, and it got bigger. Anyway, I guess it's been 8 years, but generally, I think herbs are a really great place to start. They are very expensive in the store, very easy to grow. I'll show you which ones you can grow, different seasons, different places to put those herbs, and I think I've got 11 different herbs. I was trying to count. I think it's about 11 different herbs that I'm growing right now on my property. And I've kind of got them sprinkled throughout, so we'll walk around and look at each one. But I'll show you the different places you could grow them. If you're starting in an apartment, I'll actually recommend this vertical garden that I'm using. I think is a great place to start as far as herbs. You could plant a few other things in there too, but herbs are really a great place to start. And herb plants are really interesting. They'll start out small, but they can get big really quickly. And you'll see that in a few of the herbs that I have. And I'll also show you a few different varieties of herbs. I mean, you think there's parsley, but there's like crinkle leaf parsley and straight leaf parsley, and there's so many different kinds of basil. It's crazy. I've only got a couple varieties though, so I'll show you what I have and kind of my recommendations and when to plant them and what you can have different types of year. One that I don't plant that it's more of a winter one, and it's just not particularly popular in my family, is cilantro. I know a lot of people love it. You want to put it in your salsa, and then your tomatoes come in the summer and your cilantro's in the winter because it bolts in the summer here. It can be a little frustrating. So that may be one you'd have to buy at the store if you really desperately want it in with your fresh tomatoes you get out of your garden. But let's get started, and I'll show you the 11 herbs that I like to grow. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to keep the count properly, but I'll try. The first and the favorite, this is basil. This is an annual. It is not perennial, so you'll regrow it or replant it every year. This is actually 2 different kinds of basil mixed in here. This is a Genoese, which is an Italian basil. This is cardinal. You see a little purple in there. It's a little bit different, but I happen to plant 2 plants in there, and they both got really big, which is great. This can be used for lots of things. I make it pesto with it, but that's a great one to grow. It grows really well here in Texas. The one thing I will say, don't put it in full sun. You think it goes in full sun, but not in Texas. Maybe if you're in a northern climate, but here in Texas, it gets way too hot. It'll bolt. It'll taste terrible by probably July, maybe even June. I have it in a pot here so I can move it around. And I also, you'll see it peppered throughout my garden. Here's 2 other locations of basil. They're going to be shady locations come summer because these pepper plants are going to get big. They're going to block out most of the sun, and that is very much intentional. Here is another basil plant. You can already see this one's actually already thinking about bolting. Actually, I think this is cardinal basil. It might be Thai basil. Maybe it's supposed to bolt like that. Anyway, this is intended to be in a shady spot so that it won't bolt as quickly. Tucked in between a couple of, it's going to get shade from the morning sun and shade from the afternoon sun over here, and that should help it bolt more slowly. This is theoretically a perennial, which means it'll come back every year herb. This is rosemary. Rosemary is wonderful. It is not always a perennial here in Texas. These last couple of years we've had kind of a crazy cold weather. It does fine in like 32 degrees, maybe down to like 28, but once it gets down to the 20s, like it did this last year, it dies back. So I have this guy in technically a pot that can be brought inside for a really hard freeze to protect it. Just want to show you this little guy. These guys love all the flies and bugs in our garden. Anyway, another one, I have it in 2 places, is dill. Dill is really easy to grow here. It will probably bolt in the summer, but I've got this one in a particularly shady spot, so this one will probably survive the summer. A couple stems got broken off, but that's no big deal. It'll recover and keep growing. This is chamomile. This will produce those little white flowers you see on the front of a chamomile tea packet. Maybe it's not technically an herb, but I think that's a wonderful smell, and sometimes I'll make tea out of the flowers, and I also just think it's really pretty. Sometimes it's nice to plant something that's just pretty in your garden. It is believe it or not, a parsley plant. It is huge. It's bolting. I'm actually just letting it go for the pollinators, just letting these flowers kind of mature and letting the whole plant kind of go nuts. But this is a straight leaf parsley. You'll see the leaves. I'll show you a different kind of parsley later that isn't bolting. It's also in a much shadier spot. All right, this is a curly leaf parsley. This one is, I think it's a slow bolt parsley. It's doing really well. Highly recommend it. Put it in a shady spot. And this one is actually, it's supposed to be an annual, but I think because of its shady location, it even survived the freeze. I did cover it. But this guy is really resilient. It's come back every year, bigger and bigger. And it also seems to be a host to some really pretty butterflies, and they can have as much of this as they want. The plant is huge. All right, I can't remember if I'm on 4 or 5 now, but this guy right here is chives. And this is actually, I've let it go to seed. I might save some of these seeds. Look at those. Those are pretty. The seeds, I know. The flowers are also pretty. I've got a little bit of an obsession with seed saving lately. But anyway, these are chive plants. This is just a regular onion chive flavor. Smells amazing. Tastes great. I use it all the time. So much better than having to go buy fresh chives from the store. And I also have a garlic chive. I'm going to count this as a separate one because it's got a totally different flavor profile. You'll even notice the stems. These are thin and flat. These are kind of a more round shape. And it's got a completely different flavor and smell, which is lovely. This is a thyme. I think part of the reason these do so well over here is because they actually get shaded by whatever's in the garden bed in the summer, which is really helpful. But this is a thyme plant. I've had maybe 2 or 3 over the years, over 8 years. These are definitely all perennials. They come back every year. If treated properly, if conditions are good, if watered consistently, they do come back every year. And so it's like a one-time investment of, I don't know, I think it's $2.99 at the nursery that I buy them from, and you're set for 8 years on some of these. I definitely think I've had this plant for 8 years. This is oregano. I can't remember if this is the original one I had, or maybe I've replaced it once or twice, but oregano, it does get a little woody. You'll have to trim it back a little bit. Some of these other ones, there's absolutely no maintenance, except for keeping them contained. But this oregano I think I've had to trim it back and trim it kind of back to the base, and then it'll come back again if it gets too woody. But oregano is a great one to grow. There's also a lot of different kinds of oregano. I can't remember what kind this is. It smells amazing. But there are a lot of different varieties, and this may look different than oregano you've traditionally seen. This is sage. Sage is used in a lot of pork dishes, things like that. It smells really interesting to me. It's not my favorite smell. But this one, I think I've had this for 8 years. And what it'll do is it'll get real woody, and I just trim it back to the base, and it comes back. I pull out the wooden sticks, and we're good to go again. Now this one can get really out of control. I planted this in, I want to say it was like this hole right here a couple years ago. Chocolate mint. Picked a flavor that I really liked. These are great for like mojitos. So you can put them in tea. You can make just straight mint tea. You could put it in a iced tea, something like that. This chocolate mint is probably my favorite flavor of mint. You just pinch off however much you need. Obviously, I have a ton of it. It goes crazy in Texas. This was completely dead in the winter. Turns out it had been sneaking into multiple other holes, and we have enough mint for like, I don't know, 10 families to drink tea every day. But mint is a little bit of a dangerous one. You want to make sure you look for their runners, pull it out before it takes over your entire garden, and make sure you have it. I would recommend putting it in a pot. I'm pretty diligent about keeping it out of the other beds, but I recommend putting it in a pot, actually, generally. This, I guess I don't consider it an herb, but I think it is, actually. So this part of the fennel plant, this is fennel. You can see the base down there. This is the big traditional white fennel. I think that this is used a lot. It smells and tastes a lot like licorice. If you like licorice flavor, oh my gosh, buy this plant. It's super cool. It's got such an intense, a mild, but really beautiful flavor. But fennel is kind of a semi-herb. I mean, maybe it is an herb. I haven't used it really in my life, but I love the smell of it, and I actually like the fennel, the white fennel root, I guess. So recommend that one. Apologies for the background noise. I'm hoping my mic won't pick up too much of it, but it's a beautiful day for this, and unfortunately somebody's decided to tear down a house nearby. But wanted to give you some tips on herbs. One thing I will say, parsley, dill, things like that, they do better in cooler temperatures, or at least not Texas summer temperatures, and so you'll notice they'll bolt or they may not survive the summer. It's actually the summer that kills a lot of our herbs, not the winter. And I actually recommend that pretty much every herb that we talked about, except for mint, gets quite a bit of shade, because in Texas, the summer is so hot and so intense, and the sun is so intense with that heat combination, and us being in a more southern location, that it's just kind of brutal on pretty much everything. And if you want the herbs to survive multiple years, one, you want to put them in a little bit, if you're going to put them in a pot, put them in a deep pot, so they have lots of moisture to draw from. Make sure to water them regularly. Don't leave for the month of August and not water them. Or if you're going to put them on a drip system or put them in the shade, move the pot to shade. I have a few things like basil in particular. I'm trying to reserve, one big pot of basil that I can make pesto on for all season. I have one big pot of basil I'm going to move to further and further in the shade as the summer gets more and more intense. And then I have everything else kind of planted in between plants or tucked in behind them where they won't get the afternoon, all the other herbs where they won't get the afternoon sun, because that can just really help with keeping the plant alive longer and then allowing it to live multiple years. As I've mentioned, many of my plants I've had for 8 years. So I bought them once for $2.99 or $3.99 or however much it is from a local nursery, and I've had them for 8 years. And so that's one-time investment in chives or thyme, or even maybe definitely the sage. I think a few of them I've had to replace like once in a bad freeze or something like that. Then basil you will have to replace every year. Parsley, except for I have a weird one that seems to keep coming back. Cilantro, things like that. Dill you'll have to replace every year, but it's still a lot cheaper than buying it if you use the herb a lot. So you can do this. I highly recommend planting herbs. It's a great place to start. I showed you that tower garden, which is the vertical garden that had all the different tiers up of it, and it had the rosemary at the top. I highly recommend using that as a starting place if you want to grow herbs and you just have a back patio, maybe an apartment or something like that. If you've got about 6 hours of sun, but you'll just rotate it every few days, and that'll give it sun on all sides, and that should kind of even out the sun. And that's a really great way to start. You can grow lots of different things, try out lots of things, kind of use that as your classroom. Maybe you're going to get a house someday and have a big yard and put lots of plants in it. Well, it's great to start somewhere, because my first couple of years of gardening, even herbs, lots of things died because I didn't know what I was doing and I hadn't had any practice. And so if you start with whatever you can, maybe a couple pots, maybe a vertical garden, and just take one step at a time, one baby step at a time. Herbs are a great place to start. They're pretty indestructible for the most part, as long as you water them. They get the proper amount of sun, not too much sun, not too little. I know that's the Goldilocks problem, but generally they are on the easier side of things that you can grow, and they'll give you that boost of confidence that I think we all need to get started. And then once you're off to the races, I hope you do what I did and just keep planting more and more and more. And then herbs are kind of this side hobby of yours that I almost take for granted at this point. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have herbs in my backyard. Buy them from the store, that feels crazy to me. I'd probably be the person huffing in the store being like, $5 for a little thing of basil, that's crazy, because yeah, that would totally be me. Anyway, I hope that this gives you a little confidence, inspires you to try something new, to start something out. If nothing else, it gives you a great, what do they call it when you smell things, and it makes you feel better and calms your nervous system. Aromatherapy option for your back patio or your backyard. You can do it. It's going to be great. Herbs are a great place to start. Good luck with your garden this year. Hope it's a great one.